Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many of you here today, especially many young people and new faces. For those who first time came to attend our Perspective Asia lecture series, please, very warm welcome. Before we start, I probably introduce a little bit about myself. My name is Gloria Ge, Acting Director of Griffith Asia Institute. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodian of the land we meet today. We pay our respects to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islander people here with us. This year marks 21 years of Griffith University partnership with the Queensland Art Gallery and Gallery of Modern Art. Most of our speakers have come from outside of the university, so it is especially meaningful to present one of our own colleagues. It is my great honor to introduce our speaker tonight, Professor Haig Patapan. Haig is internationally recognized for his scholarship in political leadership studies and democracy theory. For those who know Haig, I think you would agree with me, he is a true scholar. He is so prolific. If I were to read all the titles of his books and journal articles, we would be here all night. In recognition of his prominent contribution in his field, Haig has been a fellow of the Academy of the Social Sciences in Australia since 2017, and also received many other prestigious fellowships from the best universities in the world. As an academic myself, I deeply admire Haig's dedication to writing books that enrich public debate on important issues. I recently spoke with a Japanese visiting scholar about the changes in academic environment there. He reflected that Japan once was known for making long-term investment in research and give academics the space to pursue deep intellectual questions. Today, however, universities in Japan, Australia, and everywhere face growing pressures around funding, publication outputs, and institutional performance. It would not be an overstatement to say that the social sciences and humanities studies are facing something of a dark age. That is why Haig's sustained focus on thoughtful, rigorous, and publicly engaged scholarship is so remarkable. It reflects not only on his own determination, but also the supportive environment of Griffith University has sought to foster. As doing things differently, Griffith University at the 50s reminds us Griffith has always aimed to distinguish itself from more traditional models of university education and organization. Through forums such as Perspective Asia, we are proud to support informed public discussion on significant and sometimes sensitive issues relating to our region. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome our former Vice-Chancellor, Professor Emeritus Ian O'Connor, AC, Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Griffith Business School, Professor Caitlin Byrne, AM, and deans and heads of departments and colleagues across the university. I doubt you would find many other universities whose many senior leaders would attend a professor's lecture on a Thursday evening. Tonight, Professor Haig Patapan will speak about his recently published book, Who is a Modern Tyrant? Released only in March this year. I had the privilege of reading it during my recent trip to Singapore, which placed the book in a particularly interesting context and made me think about Singapore's great leader, Lee Kuan Yew. I must be honest as well. I haven't finished reading the book yet. I'm usually a fast reader, but with this book, I find myself stopping often to reflect on the question it raises. It's really deeply thought-provoking and has helped me to think more carefully about who modern tyrants are. With that, I warmly welcome Haig to the stage. There will be time for questions at the end of the talk. Thank you.
Well, with an introduction like that, I might stop while I'm ahead. Such distinguished guests, I have to say I'm feeling rather nervous saying anything in front of you. I will say, though, as an introductory comment, that Perspectives Asia, a long-term collaboration between Griffith and GOMA, Griffith Business School, Griffith Asia Institute, is one of the most enriching institutions for Brisbane, but also internationally, I think. So it's a real honor and a pleasure for me to be here tonight. Let me start with an obvious question. Why would you ask that stupid question? Because surely we know a tyrant when we see one. So why are we posing this question? We're posing this question because of a certain optimism we had. In 1807, the philosopher Hegel wrote a book called The Phenomenology of Spirit, and his argument was Geist throughout history was moving in a kind of dialectical process that would end in a state of universal reconciliation, a kind of democracy and freedom reconciled with rights. This trajectory, according to Hegel, would mark the end of history. That would be it. Humanity would be happy after that. Now, nearly 200 years later, a political scientist called Samuel Huntington wrote a book called The Third Wave. And as you can see from that chart, he seemed to find evidence for this. Now, the wave theories were not philosophical reflections. They were observations about how the world was becoming democratic. And the world seemed so optimistic at the time about the prospect of democracy. The only question then was, how do we encourage democratization? Very few people focused on tyranny because that seemed like an atavistic concept, something that was left behind, such a primitive thing. Who worries about that anymore? This view was encouraged, by the way, by revolutions. Think of the Philippines Revolution, the Yellow Revolution, and all the Soviet, post-Soviet revolutions, the tulip and so on. So there was a real optimism in the air. You know what's coming. The problem was this. The democracies that we thought were advancing were starting to backslide. Voting rights were changing, institutions were being challenged, judiciary replaced, and so on. And there was a rise of something quite unusual, new tyrannies, if I can put it in those terms, that were smarter. Previously, democracy was the only game in town, but now even tyrants were democrats. So let me give you the title of North Korea. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Democratic People's Republic. Really, really democratic. So suddenly we had to think about authoritarian regimes. But when we start thinking about authoritarian regimes, we, I think, should think about the seminal individuals within those regimes. The leaders, the tyrants, as it were. So the question was, who were these people? And as you can see from the titles we used, we weren't sure. So we talked about strongman and despot, autocrat, dictator, populist, authoritarian. We're searching with these titles for a tag, but we're just not sure what it is. By the way, that's the Kim family. The daughter is visiting dad, asking what you do for your job, dad. She's moved from beloved to respected, which means she might take a future role in it. The lovely image here of a family in tranquil bliss should not really persuade us of what's happening in Korea, because Mr. Kim killed his father-in-law in 2013 for corruption, allegedly, but just not following his instructions. And his half-brother made a mistake of transiting through KL airport, where two young women came and gave him refresher towels, which had VX poison, and he died within 30 minutes. So family values, yes, but I'm not sure it quite meets the standards we expect. So the question I want to raise again is, who is the modern tyrant? And it may surprise you that this question was raised 2,500 years ago. This image is of Periander of Corinth, who apparently devised all the most sophisticated techniques of tyranny at the time. It's said that an envoy from another tyrant, came to visit him saying, "What are the tricks you're using?" And he didn't say anything, he just walked through his wheat field, slowly lopping off the tallest heads of wheat. And the envoy said, "I don't know, I think he's crazy. I don't know what he was trying to tell me." And he reported this to the other tyrant, and the tyrant said, "You don't understand. He's saying we need to kill the most prominent citizens to make sure the regime stays the way it is." So Periander developed all these techniques, but the question for the Greeks and others at the time is, what sort of regime is this? It doesn't seem like a monarchy, a basileus, or it doesn't seem like any other conventional arrangement. So this is a puzzle that was confronted by historians like Herodotus, by the poets, Sophocles, Euripides, and so on, especially by the sophists like Protagoras and Gorgias, who sold technical advice for a lot of money. But perhaps the most profound reflection on what was this entity, which was provisionally called tyrannos, a Lydian term, not a Greek term, was and can be found in Plato's Republic. So in Plato's Republic, we find a deep engagement with the notion of tyranny through a negative and a positive aspect, the positive being the construction of the Kalipolis, the beautiful city, the ideal city, in order to counter the tyranny that is a challenge. Now, why is a tyranny a challenge for the interlocutors? It may surprise you to know that Plato included his family members in the Republic. Imagine writing a great philosophical work and including your family members. His older brothers are included, Glaucon and Adeimantus. And in a way, Glaucon and Adeimantus drive the narrative of the dialogue of the Republic. And they do so because they're hugely politically ambitious and they want to take office and be just because they're of decent character. But they say to Socrates, "Socrates, we want to do the right thing, but people like Thrasymachus, who's a rhetor, people like Thrasymachus say that people who do the right thing are kind of stupid. Because no one really who's courageous and has abilities and courage above all would actually be just." And so I'm going to now reenact, if you don't mind, Thrasymachus' argument. Now, some of you are sensitive about these things. I don't want to be the first one cancelled in the PA history. You can block your ears. This is Thrasymachus, it's not me, okay? So the Thrasymachus argument goes something like this. Happiness consists of satisfying desires without constraint. Most believe this, but lack the courage or the ability to overcome shame, laws, and divine limits to do this. Now, you may disagree with Thrasymachus. What Plato does is offers you a challenge regarding that claim. So in the dialogue, he has this thing called the Ring of Gyges. I think Professor Gay is going to distribute it at the end of the evening. The Ring of Gyges is a ring you put on and it makes you invisible. So the challenge I have for you and your conscience is, if you had the Ring of Gyges, would you do anything different in your life? Would you go about the same way, or would you do different things? And this is the real challenge of the Thrasymachiean objection. Because Thrasymachus says most people are weak and therefore they can't pursue what they really desire. What they do then is they compromise with other weak people and they say, let's all agree not to be tyrannical to each other. I won't be a tyrant, you won't be a tyrant, and we'll be a mutually contracted parties. And we'll call this a democracy. This is Thrasymachus's critique of democracy. He says democracy is fundamentally unjust because it suppresses the talented, ambitious, and glory-seeking individuals in this way, using force. So this is the critique of democracy. So what is the advice Thrasymachus gives? Well, Thrasymachiean advice, again, block your ears if you want to not do this at home. Thrasymachiean advice is, well, you can't really break the laws because you'll be put in jail. And you can't rape and pillage and do all those things because they're petty and stupid. They won't get you anywhere. What you really need to do is take over the place. So it's not little crimes, you have to do a really big crime. Because if you do a really big crime, then you end up making the laws. And if you make the laws are your instruments, and you can tell other people to do things to please you. So consequently, as we can see, if you set up yourself as a tyrant, then obeying laws becomes just, but only because it advantages the strong. And the happiest person, and perhaps the only happy person in a tyranny, is the tyrant, because the tyrant can satisfy all of his desires without restraint, without limit. Not just conventional desires, but the desires affecting the soul. So this is the Socratic analysis of the tyrannical soul. Someone who longs for the pleasures of the table, the bedroom, and so on, but above all, the pleasures associated with being loved, admired, and being preeminent. Who remembers the second place getter in the Olympics? Is there anyone sadder than the second place getter? Because they look to the left and they look to the right and they think, what a loser. Because the third thinks, whoa, I made it. I got a medal. And the first is always first. So the second place is very sad. And that's the plight of most people accordingly. Thrasymachus' critique, therefore, is that the average person's soul is profoundly conflicted. The average person longs desperately and admires tyranny while at the same time hating it in case they're subjected to it. So the tyrant longs not only for glory, but in a way vies with the cosmos, claiming to be immortal, at least as immortal as any human being can be, but equal to the gods, because surely you can't be so successful unless the gods have approved your actions. Or even more radically, you make yourself into a god that people have to obey. So here we have the Socratic critique of tyranny and the tyrant. So Socrates counters Thrasymachus in the claim that the tyrant is the happiest person by saying, actually no, because the soul of the tyrant is always bedeviled and stung by neediness and divided constantly into different desires that could only be satisfied by suppressing some of those. So there's a contradiction in the logic of the soul of the tyrant, as you can see. There's also inherent contradiction in the logic and trajectory of tyranny. Socrates outlines how someone like Glaucon, who may want to be a good tyrant, no, I don't want to do bad things, I just want to rule the place, is inevitably drawn into this trajectory. And the starting point, at least in this account, is to be demagogue. The demagogue, or modern populist, I suppose, would appeal to the general poor, saying the big end of town have stolen money from you. It's so unfair, isn't it? Vote me in, and I'll take the money that they've taken off you and give it to you. So they stir up unrest and overturn the regime, and once they possess the laws, they transform the laws, giving some property away, but then appropriating and aggrandizing themselves, and then they start building magnificent palaces, huge works, putting their names on everything from coins to you name it. And finally, when people start rising up, remember what I said about Periander and the wheat? Socrates says they taste blood. They have to kill the people who rise up, the most noble citizens who fight against this. And after that, there's a kind of constant warfare taking place where the tyrant is terrified and the people are oppressed and fearful of what the tyrant might do. So rather than being perfectly happy, the logic of tyranny produces unhappiness both for the subjects and for the tyrant. And because of this inner tension, tyranny is the most cruel and unstable of regimes, according to Socrates. It's inherently unstable because it's based not on amity, which produces concord and peace, but on constant struggle and fear between citizens and the leaders. So that was the Socratic account of the classical tyrant. Why can't we use that definition of tyrant in the modern world? I want to suggest to you that the logic of the classical tyrant, as I presented to you, compels us to revisit the notion of tyrant. It does so because what is honorable, what is glorious, and so on, is transformed in modernity by modern concepts. And these four representative examples I've included for you in the notion of nationalism, religion, and ideology, things that did not exist in classical time. I'll give you one example. If the eagle is supposed to be the grand image of the tyrant, the Christian religion, of course, elevates another creature, the lamb. The lamb is not an eagle. It's the most gentle and harmless creature you can imagine. If you've read the New Testament, the Sermon on the Mount, and the Beatitudes, it's the weak in spirit, the people who do not seek glory, who are ironically children of God. So you can see how religion transforms the expectations of glory for a future tyrant. So we need to take this into account when we think about the desires, the glory-seeking, and all those other things of modern tyrants. I'm going to go through 3 examples, if you don't mind, but I just want to remind you that each one need not be isolated, so you can have a tyrant who's a nationalist as well as being religious. You know, you can have a Putin, for example, who elevates the Russian Orthodox Church and Russian Mir, the great Russian dream of conquest and so on. So let me start with the nationalist tyrant. You'll find many nationalists to be found, they're usually in South America and also in Africa because of post-colonial initiatives. They're ambitious, typically men, but occasionally women, who try to counter the colonial impositions for their nation. And the problem is, once they assume power, before you know it, they like what they've found. And so I've given you Mugabe as a case of the grand hopes. He was actually believe it or not, a teacher, a Roman Catholic teacher, who endured 10 years of imprisonment in the shift from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe, assumed power, and slowly the rule degenerates until he uses force to remain in office, and then finally, in I think 2008, just takes all the farms from the white farmers and distributes it to his cronies who know nothing about farming. In 2008, you'd think Australian inflation is bad. Inflation would double every 24 hours. Hyperinflation, an unprecedented degree. And then, of course, he uses violence to remain in office until 89 or so, and then the cronies say, we see your wife Grace wants to continue this business. I think we're going to have to imprison you. Nearly $2 billion is appropriated from the country, dispersed around the world. I thought I'd cheer you up with another story. This I really like because this person is like the old-fashioned tyrant, having a bit of fun. So Niyazov was the first secretary of the Turkmen Communist Party from 1985 until 1991, and continued to rule Turkmenistan for 15 years after independence from Soviet Union in 1991. He called himself Turkmenbashi, or head of the Turkmen, and his rule was distinguished by being tyrannical, verging on totalitarian. So if you ever visited this place, you would see that he notoriously had renamed months and days of the week. That's what tyrants can do. He made his autobiography mandatory reading for schools and essential for job interviews and even for driving tests. I don't know how he can do that, but he did. He renamed schools, airports, and even a meteorite after himself and members of his family. In the capital, Ashgabat, he erected a rotating $12 million golden statue of himself that always faced the sun, because that's what tyrants do. He's said to have stolen in excess of $3 billion, while Turkmenistan, under his rule, had the lowest life expectancy in Central Asia. I don't think they cheered you up, I'm sorry. The next example I want to give you is of the religious tyrant. So there are many, of course, who use religion. There's Salazar of Portugal who uses Catholicism, as does Franco in his El Caudillo in favor of the Catholic Church and so on. Vladimir Putin, I've already mentioned. There's Zia from Pakistan, who takes Islamic socialism and completely corrupts the state. Unfortunately, it's not the Islam we all like, because it's sort of medieval, where people who steal lose their arms. Not much potential for rehabilitation there. But I thought I'd give you this example because it is another really weird case. So we're talking about Francois Papadoc Duvalier. Papadoc because he was actually trained in medicine. And what he wanted to do, he was elected to office in 1957 with the promise of guaranteeing the liberty of the Haitian people, but would soon use intimidation, repression, and patronage to maintain power. Duvalier, the reason I picked him is because he invents his own religion. And I think that's a pretty cool thing to do, and makes it a state religion. So he favored Noirism, claiming that the true Haitian soul was black and its religion was voodoo. He advocated authentic black leadership, which sounds promising in Haiti. The problem is he soon appointed Hougans. Now, Hougans are priests of voodoo, as leaders of the Tonton Macoutes. Now, Tonton Macoutes would be those gentlemen with the really scary masks. I don't know how you would feel if those people knocked on your door at midnight, especially with skeleton hand that one of them is holding, and the others are holding machetes and so on. So these lovely creatures would go around raping, killing, stealing, doing all those things as state terrorism. So people became terrified of the Tonton-Macoutes as a militia force, which he used. But soon Duvalier himself had ambitions for his religion. He decided that he himself would affect the manners of the Hugan, the priest. He started appearing as Baron Semendi. Baron Semendi is an Iwa, or spirit of the dead and guardian of cemeteries, resembling a corpse. So he's a corpse prepared for a funeral. So he would have a top hat, black tailcoat, wearing dark glasses, cotton plugs in his ear, as you would a corpse, of course, and claimed that he was Iwa, Jesus Christ, and God himself, encouraging rumors that he had contacts with the occult, that if you went against him, bad things would happen to you. So this was what the Haitians endured for a long time. You thought that was bad. So between them, these gentlemen have killed perhaps 80 million people. I don't know about you, but after the first million, the mind boggles. The enormity of what has happened, I can't fathom. So I think even 1,000 dead is bad enough. My favorite hateful creature is Pol Pot, who killed nearly 2 million of his own people. Brother number one. Don't you like how they always talk about families in the tyrants? Brother number one, on his deathbed, said he may have made a few errors, but never recanted what he did. Some of these people took up philosophical ideologies developed by others, but we shouldn't forget that tyrants also developed their own ideologies. Mussolini wrote The Doctrine of Fascism in 1932. Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, of course, as you know. Nasser wrote The Philosophy of the Revolution. Gaddafi, The Green Book. Kim Il-sung, Joe Jakip, and Niozov, as you know, the Ruknamama. So you can have homemade ideologies or the traditional fascism and Marxism and so on. And these ruled the Cold War, of course. You had to take sides, and if you were the Soviet satellite, you would adopt ideologies, East Germany and all those other tyrants in place, while the West adopted South American ideologues who are effectively fascist as a counterweight against them. So tyrants were used in the great game of international relations. So, what is distinctive about the modern tyrant? Well, one thing is they certainly use the periander techniques of tyranny, but they have new techniques as well. So one of the most important techniques is they no longer come and just take your property. They say, I'm just going to tax some of it. So state capitalism becomes a technique that enriches the state leader while allowing them to dominate the subjects. Related to that is use of voting and elections, ostensibly as a counter to international pressure, saying you're not real Democrats. Or saying, no, we voted, we had referenda, we had one party, and so on. But also, I think, for the very sophisticated ones, I think Gloria mentioned Singapore, it's used as a conduit to see what people are actually fearing or want to do, even if it doesn't really change the regime that much. Finally, there's the use of law. Remember how I said you should do big crimes and end up being the lawmaker? Mao's famous expression was that law is the party's knife handle. So laws are made. As you can see, that is Bo Xilai in the corruption campaign by China. What I love about these trials, by the way, the corruption initiative was hugely popular in China because they didn't like the corruption for some reason. But the Chinese are they're so good at theater because what they make sure in these images is to have the tallest guards that they can have next to the person about to be convicted to show how puny the criminal is compared to the power of the state. So these are the distinctive features of modern tyrants. But I want to also go to examine two other things, the two techniques that are specifically modern. One is the technique of propaganda. And I want to suggest that propaganda has two dimensions. One that is, in a way, borrowed from Christian thought and then developed through fascism and Marxism and so on. The intention is, in effect, to make sure that you can't see propaganda. So if you make something so common, so everyday, so ordinary, then it seems natural and you don't push against it. You accept it as the way it is. I've given you images from Il Duce. By the way, the Italians typically are snazzy dresses, and Il Duce borrowed this from designed by Annunzio, and the black shirt and the whole thing, and the fascists took it up, and of course the Nazis borrowed from the Italians, as you do. But here we have the Il Duce using Romanità. Romanità is Roman imagery of the fasces, hence the expression fascism, which were the devices the lictors used accompanying the dictator in ancient Rome. My favorite there, in addition to the image and the propaganda and so on, is the lamp in the far left corner. Lampada Il Duce. You can see the profile. So if you're a good fascist, you would have bought the lamp and put it in your room. So as soon as people came in, they'd say, I see you've got a great-looking lamp. So style mattered, to be cool and to be ever-present. The other aspect of propaganda, I think, is more conventional. It was initiated in late 19th century, early 20th century, developed by Edouard Bernet, who was a nephew of Freud, actually, if you didn't know. He wrote the seminal work on propaganda techniques that was used in the war, Second World War especially, and then went to US, where it was taken up by advertisers and commercialists, and now is developed in political marketing, social marketing, and so on. And the intention here, as you can see, is to tell a story about what potentially could look like, even if it's not true. So presentation of a he-man like you, one of you, if you could do this, you would do it. I've got my shirt off. I'm out in the bush just doing manly stuff. Isn't that cool? And associated with that, of course, is deep disinformation, which, of course, is becoming endemic. The other technique, of course, is technology. And I love going through the face recognition at the airport, I have to confess. But I'm not sure I want it applied everywhere I go. And one premonition or indication of where it could take us is with the social credit system in China. Let me just go through that very quickly, because I found it extraordinary how inventive people are and somewhat chilling as to what might happen to us in the future. The social credit system was proposed in 2014 by China's State Council to be operational by 2020. Sue is an international expert. She will advise us whether it's continuing or not. It was a form of social control and behavior by steering rather than actually dictating, with the promise of, as I've got there, those who keep their promises will get good things, those who don't will have obstacles placed in their way. So what it involved is giving every adult a credit code in addition to government-issued identity card. And your financial standing, your criminal record, your social media behavior, even the books people read are used to allocate individuals' social credit score. So you, like your credit, your financial, but this is a personal score. This score will be used to determine eligibility for major or influential positions, such as governmental posts and heads of corporation, while those with bad credit will be subject to sanctions, such as financial penalties. So in mid-2018, due to poor social credit scores, more than 11 people had reportedly been placed under limits on the purchase of airline tickets. and 4.25 million people were restricted in buying high-speed rail tickets. So the way of the future? I hope not. I want to close with some reflections about the dangers of modern tyrants. Now, you can see how modern tyrants pose dangers to democracy, but I would suggest to you that the danger is actually much closer to home. It's how democracies see themselves. And in fact, this is much more insidious. And I've provisionally got 5 there. I could double that, but let me just go through it very quickly. So one core problem is the way we're prepared to abandon our freedoms for convenience. We do it with apps, as we know, with private corporations. But imagine if we took it all away and we said, I'll just mind my own business and you do the politics. Then performance legitimacy becomes the basis of society, which is a doctrine that's used in almost all modern tyrannies. The second one is we should know, or we do know, I think, all of us, that debate and dispute and contestation is the lifeblood of democracies. But that assumes a public square. Do we have a public square anymore? We were so excited to have the obstacles removed from broadcasting and TVs and so on, let a million voices speak out. The problem is there are a million voices. So there are sub-communities. We don't know who commands a credible voice, and that breeds all sorts of conspiracy theories and misinformation. And we really don't have much control over this anymore, it seems to me. Legislation is a very blunt tool. Related to this is the concept of human rights. For many years, there's been a concerted attempt by modern tyrants to say human rights are Western concept. And of course, the product of that is you can't criticize anyone on the basis of human rights because you're being a Western imperialist. So that means we can't say to the Taliban that not educating children, not educating girls, depriving them from career prospects and so on, that's okay because it's your cultural right to interpret Islam in that way. By the way, that argument was made by Wollstonecraft in the 1700s. It's extraordinary how we haven't advanced much beyond that. The problem of civic education is the 4th item I want to address. Not being informed about the way democracy works inspires people to think that argumentation and debate is inefficient. So they see China putting up hospitals in 3 weeks, while it takes months, if not years, for dams to be constructed here, roads changed, and so on. And so they say there's something fundamentally wrong about democracy. And what we want are strong leaders. We just want a strong leader to come and do things for us and cut all this rubbish, this noise. And that's a real temptation in modern democracies and a real danger. Finally, we've mentioned the demagogue, the perennial appeal of attacking the rich, but now not just the rich, but elites, however defined. They may be managers, they may be the educated, they may be whatever you may wish. But if only someone could come and save us, if the populace could save us, that's a real temptation. And all of these dangers are in democracy itself rather than outside from tyrants. So, who is the modern tyrant? Modern tyrant is like the classical tyrant, but now smarter, more powerful, and much more dangerous. I invite your questions and any comments you may have. Thank you.